My name is Sophie Sinclair. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a pediatric nurse. The one they page when everything goes wrong at 3 in the morning. Last spring, at my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, my sister slid a bread basket in front of my 7-year-old while her kids cut into steaks, and my dad told me I should have packed him something. I just smiled and said, "Noted." Then the waiter came back to our table and I stood up and made a small announcement that ended 40 years of family arithmetic. But that dinner was only the beginning. What I found in the weeks after, buried in a mortgage file and in a green cloth ledger at the back of my father's desk, made that bread basket look like a kindness, and what I did about it cost me every seat at that table. I would do it again tomorrow. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally stop paying for everyone else's dinner and family secrets get read out in full. If you have ever been the one who always covers the check, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Harlan's Chop House is the kind of place Millbrook saves for graduations and funerals with good insurance, white tablecloths, jazz turned down low. My sister Madison had booked the long table by the fireplace for our parents' 40th anniversary, and she'd called ahead that afternoon to pre-order for everyone. The food arrived like a parade. A ribeye for Harper, who is 8. A ribeye for Brody, who is 5 and eats mostly beige food. A lobster tail for her husband Travis, who tapped his new watch against the table while he waited. The steaks at Harlan's run $120 a plate, which meant my nephew was about to ignore a piece of meat worth more than my first car payment. Then the parade stopped. Nothing landed in front of Caleb. My son sat there with his hands in his lap, looking at the empty space where a plate should be. Madison didn't even pause her conversation. "Oh, we didn't order for your son," she said, and slid the bread basket toward him like she was doing us a favor. "The kids' menu here is sad. Trust me." My mother studied her wine. My father cut into his steak and, without looking up, added, "You should have packed him something." Caleb took one dinner roll and held it with both hands, careful, the way kids do when they're trying not to take up space. 7 years old, and he already knew his portion in this family. I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold, the way it does at work right before I start giving orders. I smiled at my sister. I smiled at my father. "Noted," I said. Then I raised my hand, flagged down our waiter, and asked him one question that changed the temperature of the whole table. "Are you still serving the full menu?" I asked. The waiter said yes. I ordered my son the ribeye, medium, with mashed potatoes, and the biggest chocolate dessert on the menu. "On a separate check, please, just his and mine." The table went still in that particular way my family goes still, like a machine waiting to see if it needs to correct something. My mother leaned toward me, voice soft as frosting. "Sweetheart, you'll split the main bill with Travis, won't you? Your father's on a fixed income." And there it was. Here's what you need to know about my family's dinners. For 3 years, every one of them had been billed as Dad's treat. And for 3 years, when the check came, my father would pat his jacket, my mother would murmur about his heart, and the bill would drift down the table to me and Travis. Then Travis started forgetting his wallet. Not every time. Just often enough that I stopped being surprised. I had done the math on the drive over, actually. Birthdays, Easters, 2 anniversaries, a christening. I had been quietly buying this family's celebration since Caleb was in kindergarten. So when the waiter brought Caleb's steak and set it down in front of my boy, who looked up at me like I'd pulled off a magic trick, I stood up. Not fast. Not loud. I'm a nurse. I don't do scenes. I do announcements. "Caleb and I are going to finish our dinner," I said. "I'm paying our check. Just ours. And effective tonight, the family bank is closed." My mother's mouth opened. Madison laughed, one sharp note waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Caleb ate every bite of that steak and most of the dessert, and I drank my coffee slowly, because we were not going to be rushed. Then I put cash on our check, tipped the waiter well, took my son's hand, and walked out past 40 years of marriage and $120 steaks. Driving home, I honestly believed that dinner was the worst thing my family had ever done to me. I was off by $9,400. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because it matters. I work nights on the pediatric floor at St. Luke's in Millbrook, Ohio. I've been peed on by toddlers with better manners than my brother-in-law. Calm isn't my personality. It's my job requirement. Caleb's father left when Caleb was 2. He left quietly, which was the most considerate thing he ever did, and I've raised my son alone in a 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from my parents' house. Self-made isn't a brag when you're a single mother, it's just the schedule. And here is what the schedule included. 4 years ago, my father had bypass surgery. I slept in a hospital chair for a week, and when he came home, I started sending my parents $400 a month for his medications. Nobody asked me to stop, so it never stopped. 3 years ago, in a hospital hallway, my mother pressed a pen into my hand and asked me to co-sign Madison's SUV, $38,000. It's only a formality, Sophie. Madison will pay every cent. And for 2 years, Madison actually did. I want to be clear about something, because I know how this sounds. I was not a doormat. I said no to plenty. I said no to a timeshare, no to Travis's business idea, no to a loan for a hot tub, and every no cost me a week of my mother's wounded silence and a month of the family phone tree. I paid the $400 because it was cheaper than the alternative, and the alternative was watching Caleb get frozen out of Christmas. I thought I knew exactly what my family cost me. It turned out I only knew the visible line items. Now, let me tell you what I wanted, because this story is really about a house. A little blue 2-bedroom on Alder Street, 6 minutes from Caleb's school, with a crooked front porch and an oak tree in the backyard that was practically begging for a tire swing. I had $28,000 saved for the down payment. 6 years of night shifts, 6 years of skipped vacations, store-brand everything, and picking up holiday rotations nobody wanted because they pay time and a half. Every deposit had a purpose, and the purpose had a bedroom window facing east. The first time I took Caleb to see it, he pressed both hands flat against the glass like he was checking its pulse. "Which room is mine?" he asked. I already knew. I had already measured, with my eyes, exactly where his dinosaur bed would go. Left wall, under the window, so the morning light would land on him instead of an alarm clock. My loan officer was a no-nonsense woman named Dana Whitfield, and she liked my file. Steady employment, 12 years at the same hospital, clean payment history, healthy down payment. Strong application, she told me. We get you through underwriting, we lock your rate, and you're home by summer. All I had to do was pass underwriting. People think underwriting is paperwork. It isn't. It's an X-ray. It finds everything, including the things you didn't know were inside you. I'm a nurse, so I should have remembered my own rule. The tests you don't study for are the ones that kill you. 2 weeks after that anniversary dinner, my phone rang, and the X-ray came back with a shadow on it. But first, the phone tree. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke up to 11 missed calls. My mother's voicemail led the parade, her voice doing that trembling thing she saves for church and confrontation. "You embarrassed your sister in public, Sophie, after everything this family has done for you." Madison posted a story that afternoon, a sunset, a wine glass, and the caption, "Some people make everything about money, praying for them." Travis sent a text of pure moral authority. "Not cool, Soph." By Wednesday, my Aunt Lorraine called, which is how I knew my mother had escalated to the reserves. Lorraine, to her credit, mostly listened. The rest of the family did not. I know how this system works because I've watched it my whole life. In our family, I was never a person who got hurt. I was a patient who had stopped taking her medication, and everyone had been deputized to call me back into treatment. The treatment was compliance. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I typed and deleted 11 different paragraphs and finally sent nothing at all, and the silence felt like 2 things at once: freedom and shoplifting. That's the part nobody tells you about boundaries. The first ones feel like theft, because you were raised to believe the thing you're taking back never belonged to you. Sunday night, My mother sent one final text, and the sweetness of it should have been a warning. "We'll discuss this at Sunday dinner next week, sweetheart. We are still your family. Everything in this family is accounted for." I read it as a peace offering. I was wrong. It was an accounting term, and my mother has never once used an accounting term loosely. I went to that Sunday dinner because Caleb asked to see his grandpa, and because I don't hide from rooms. We were barely through the green beans when Madison unveiled what she called an opportunity. Harper had been accepted to Brookfield Academy, a private school with a crest and a waiting list, and the deposit was $4,000, due Friday. She looked at me the way you look at a vending machine. "You're her only aunt, Sophie." I set down my fork. "No." That was the whole sentence. I've learned not to attach an essay to it, because essays are just handles for other people to grab. The air in the dining room turned to glass. My father pushed back his chair and went out to the porch. Brody asked if anyone was going to eat the last roll, which honestly was the sanest question asked all night. My mother stood, smoothed her skirt, and asked me to help her in the kitchen, which in our house is not a request. She ran the water so no one would hear, and what she said next, she said gently. "The way you explain rules to a slow child. Every family runs on contributions, Sophie. Madison contributes the shine, the grandchildren, the holidays, the family we show the world. You contribute the steady. That is the order of things, and you have always been so good at it." I looked at my mother and understood she wasn't being cruel. She was reading me my job description. On the drive home, my phone lit up with Dana Whitfield's number and my stomach dropped before I even answered, because loan officers do not call at 7 on a Sunday evening with good news. "Sophie," she said, "we need to talk about your credit file. Can you come in tomorrow?" Dana's office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, and she didn't waste either of our time. "Underwriting flagged 2 items," she said, and turned her monitor toward me. "Flag 1, I already half expected, though seeing it still made my ears ring. The SUV I co-signed for Madison was 90 days past due. She had stopped paying in the winter, around the time I'd later realize that Travis's watch got an upgrade. And every missed month had landed on my credit like a dropped tray. My score, the one I'd spent 12 years keeping spotless, had a dent in it the size of a $38,000 truck. "Okay," I said, writing it down. Because writing things down is how I stay calm. "That one I can explain. What's the second flag?" Dana clicked once. "The visa ending in 4417. The balance is $9,400, but the payment history is actually perfect. We just need to document it." I looked at the screen. I looked at her. "Dana, I don't have a visa." The room got very quiet. She scrolled up, slowly. "The way you turn over a card you already suspect is bad. Account opened 4 years ago. Billing address: 1414 Fairground Road. My parents' house. Balance: $9,400. Minimum payment made on time, every single month, for 4 years. Never late, never flagged, never once mailed to me. Somebody had opened a credit card in my name, and then, this is the part that still gets me, somebody had protected it. Faithfully. The way you maintain a machine you plan to keep using." Dana folded her hands and asked the gentlest brutal question I've ever heard. "Sophie, whose handwriting would be on that application?" I didn't answer. I was staring at the open date. The card was born the same month as my father's bypass surgery, the same month I was sleeping in a hospital chair holding my mother's hand. That night I worked a full shift, because sick kids don't care about your family drama, and there's a mercy in that. Then I came home, poured coffee at 1 in the morning, and pulled my credit reports from all 3 bureaus. Nurses chart before they diagnose. You write down what is true, in order, before you let yourself decide what it means. So I charted. The visa ending in 4417 was opened online, 4 Aprils ago. The email on the account was a string of letters I'd never seen, but the recovery phone number was my parents' landline, the same number I'd memorized in 2nd grade. Then came the transaction history, 4 years of it, and reading it was like watching someone else live a comfortable little life wearing my name. The pharmacy on Route 9, the grocery store. My mother's salon, every 5 weeks, regular as a tide. And Harlan's Chop House. Again and again, Harlan's Chop House. Birthdays, Easter. I scrolled back to last spring and found the anniversary dinner itself, the night of the bread basket, and sat with that for a minute. My nephew's $120 steak, the one carved in front of my hungry son, had very possibly been charged to a card wearing my name. My father patting his jacket. My mother murmuring about his heart. Dad's treat. I didn't throw anything. I want that on the record because I was tempted. I made a spreadsheet instead, with dates and amounts, and I labeled the tab the way I'd label any chart, in plain language, no adjectives. Then I sat back and looked at the one fact the spreadsheet couldn't explain away. There were 2 people living in that house on Fairground Road. Only one of them kept the books. I drove to Fairground Road on my day off with the printouts in a folder because I wanted to watch my mother's face when she saw them. I have spent my career reading faces the moment bad news lands. Fear looks one way, guilt another. My mother, Carol Sinclair, looked at 4 years of fraud in her own kitchen and showed me a third thing entirely: administration. She read the first page, took off her glasses, and folded them with a little click. "Your credit was the best in the family," she said. "We put it where it would do the most good. Family shares, Sophie." No flinch. No denial. She said it the way a treasurer reads minutes. I asked her if she understood what she'd done, and she straightened, offended at last. But at the wrong thing. Not one late payment in 4 years. Not one. I protected your name like it was my own. That's when I understood the size of what I was standing in. My mother did not believe she had stolen anything. In her mind, she was managing a shared family asset, and the asset was me. I told her I needed the account closed and my name clean, that I was buying a house. She actually laughed, one small note, and tipped her head. A house. And who put braces on those teeth, Sophie? Who paid for the gas that got you to nursing school? You were an investment. Investments pay out. That is the order of things. There it was again. The order of things. Like arithmetic handed down at Sinai. Noted, I said. And this time, the word didn't feel like manners. It felt like a pen, scratching a line into a book she couldn't see. The whole time we talked, my father stood in the kitchen doorway, drying the same dry cup. He never said a word. I told myself he didn't know. I needed one parent who didn't know. I found my father in the garage the next evening, because the garage was ours. Growing up, that's where he taught me to change oil and check a battery, where he'd slip me a soda and we'd hide together from whatever storm was blowing through the kitchen. He was at the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag, and he kept wiping them long after they were clean. "Did you know?" I asked. No folder this time, just the question. My father is not a talker, so when he finally spoke, I heard how long the answer had been rehearsed. "Your mother has kept this family fed for 40 years, he said. "A card inside the family isn't stealing." He looked at me then, and his eyes did something his words wouldn't. They apologized. "Don't make this big, Sophie, please. I don't have the strength for big anymore." I stood there in the smell of motor oil, doing the one kind of math I'd never let myself do. Then he made it worse because he thought he was making it better. "Anyway, the card's how Madison keeps that truck moving. Your mother lets her use it for gas. You'd rather your sister was stranded with 2 babies?" The truck. The SUV with my signature on it, 90 days delinquent, still rolling around Millbrook on fuel charged to a card wearing my name. My father, the man who taught me to check the oil, had handed it over himself. I didn't yell. There was no one in that garage to yell at, just a tired man who had traded his spine for quiet, one small surrender at a time, over 40 years. I kissed his cheek, because he's still my dad. But I walked out of that garage with one less parent than I'd walked in with. Dana set up a call with the card issuer's fraud department, and by Thursday I was sitting in her office learning that the road forked, with no third path. Option 1. Absorb it. Pay or settle the $9,400, treat it as my debt, and keep the family peace. But the balance would sit in my debt-to-income ratio like a stone, my score would need months to heal, and my rate lock, 60 days, starting that Friday, would expire long before I did. The blue house would go back on the market, and some other family's kid would get the east-facing window. Option 2. Call it what it was. File a formal identity theft report, sign a notarized affidavit, and open a police report. The issuer would suspend the disputed balance from my liability and send documentation my underwriter could accept. The house stays possible. The timeline holds. There was just one line item in option 2 that wasn't money. The affidavit requires you to name the person who used your information, not a family member. A name. Dana slid the packet across the desk and said the truest sentence I heard that whole year. Fraud isn't fraud until you're willing to name the person who did it. If you've ever pulled your credit report with your heart in your throat or found out that family had been quietly spending your name, tell me in the comments what you did. I read everyone. And if you're still here, subscribe. Because the dinner where everything finally ended is coming, and I want you sitting next to me for it. I took the packet home, but before I signed anything, I wanted my SUV co-sign papers. And here's the thing. My copy was missing the page with the payoff terms. My father kept every document in that house in one drawer. First, though, I tried to be reasonable, because I wanted to be able to tell Caleb someday that I'd tried. I asked for a family meeting, and I came with an actual plan, typed and stapled. My parents transfer the Visa balance into their own names, a balance transfer, one afternoon of paperwork. Madison and Travis refinance the SUV into their own names and take my signature off it. Nobody calls the police. Nobody's name goes in a file. Everyone simply carries what is theirs, which I realize now was the most radical thing anyone had ever proposed at that table. Travis crossed his arms and delivered his expert opinion. Nobody refinances at these rates. That's just financial illiteracy, Soph. This from a man whose truck payment I could see from my credit report. Madison went liquid. Real tears. That's the thing about my sister. The tears are always real. They're just always for herself. You'd put Mom in a police file over a credit card? What is wrong with you? And I watched it happen. Right there over the pot roast. The reframe. In the space of one dinner, the woman whose name had been stolen became the woman attacking her family. My mother let the noise run its course, then folded her napkin and issued the ruling. This family does not sign papers against each other. I looked around the table and did something I don't recommend unless you're ready for the answer. I counted the papers already signed, the cosign with my name, the card application with my name, the $400 transfers, month after month. Every paper in this family had been signed in one direction, quietly, against me. Fine. If no one would hand me the missing page, I'd go find my copy myself. And I knew exactly which drawer to look in. Sunday morning, my parents were at church, and I still had a key, because I was the daughter you could trust with one. My father's study smelled like pipe tobacco and pencil shavings, unchanged since the 90s. The big oak desk, one drawer that mattered, everything filed the way a machinist files things, square, labeled, permanent. I found the SUV folder in the second hanging file and the missing payoff page right where it should be. If I had stopped there, this would be a different story. But when I lifted the folder, the drawer underneath it didn't look empty. At the bottom, flat against the wood, lay a ledger. Green cloth cover, corners worn soft, the kind they sold at the 5 and dime when I was a kid. A strip of masking tape across the front, and on it, in my mother's upright hand, a single word. Household. I want to tell you I hesitated. I didn't. I opened it, and my whole childhood was inside, itemized. The first page was dated the year I turned 12. Left column, expenses. Right column, a heading in careful capitals. Owed. S braces, $3,200. Prom dress, $180. Driving lessons, $240. Nursing school gas money, $35 a week, with a narrow little column running down the margin, 5%. My mother had been charging me interest before I was old enough to vote, and then the pages marked paid, and God, the things that counted as payment. Every summer I babysat Madison, logged like invoices. The paychecks from my first job at the pharmacy, the ones Mom said she'd hold for me, signed over and entered, line by line. I flipped forward, years falling past my thumb to the tabs near the back, and found Madison's pages. Cheer camp, a wedding dress, the down payment on their first apartment. Next to every entry where my pages had amounts owed, hers had a single word, written in my mother's pretty slant, gift. I stood in my father's study holding the arithmetic of my entire life, and I finally understood the anniversary dinner. The breadbasket wasn't a mood, it was policy. And then I turned to the newest page where the ink was still dark, and the newest page didn't have my name on it. The heading on the newest page was a single initial. C. It started last year. School shoes, $62. The sneakers my mother gave Caleb in September, the ones he wore to bed the first night because he loved them too much to take off. Birthday bicycle, $180. The red bike from Grandma and Grandpa. Streamers on the handlebars. My boy wobbling down the sidewalk while my father held the seat. Gifts. That's what we'd called them. That's what Caleb, 7 years old, had said thank you for, in a thank you card I helped him spell. Every one of them was entered in the ledger as a receivable. They had opened an account on my son before he could read the word account, and they were already keeping it current. My father's voice floated up from the anniversary table. You should have packed him something. And I finally heard the sentence underneath the sentence. In this family, you don't feed the ones who owe you. You feed the ones you're investing in. I closed the ledger. I did not photograph a single page, and I know half of you just yelled at me, so let me explain. A photo makes it evidence, and evidence means lawyers arguing about a sad green notebook. I didn't need it for evidence. The bank records were my evidence. I needed it for a diagnosis. I set it back in the drawer, squared the corners the way my father would, locked the front door behind me, and sat in my car in their driveway for 10 minutes with my hands at 10 and 2. There were no tears in that driveway. Nurses don't cry mid-shift. We plan treatment. I had spent 22 years trying to pay off a debt, and that afternoon I finally understood the design flaw I'd been living in. The debt was the point. It was never meant to be paid off. A paid-off daughter might leave. That night I called my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's cousin, the only relative who has never once asked me for money, which by then felt like a superpower. I asked her a question I'd never thought to ask in 34 years. What was my mother like as a girl? Lorraine was quiet long enough that I heard her television shut off. You found the book, didn't you? She said. Not a question. And then she told me about the jar. My grandmother, Eileen, kept a glass jar on the kitchen windowsill, the kind with a wire clamp. From the week my mother turned 16, half of every waitress paycheck went into that jar, every Friday, called rent. Her little brother paid nothing. When he turned 18, Eileen bought him a car outright, and my mother stood at the sink washing dishes she'd helped pay for while he honked the horn in the driveway. Your mama fed that jar until the week Eileen died, Lorraine said. The better part of 40 years, one envelope at a time. Never missed, never thanked. I sat with my coffee going cold, watching my own kitchen window like the jar might materialize on the sill. She didn't invent that arithmetic, honey, Lorraine said. She inherited it. Then she said the thing I've kept in my pocket ever since, the way you keep a stone. But inheriting a knife don't mean you have to pass it on point first. I almost felt sorry for my mother that night. I'm telling you honestly, I sat in the dark and I almost made it all the way to sorry. Then I remembered whose name was on the newest page of her ledger, written in fresh ink, in that same careful hand. Sorry could wait. My son could not. Monday morning, before my shift, I did 3 things in 1 hour at my kitchen table, and any one of them could never be undone. I canceled the $400 monthly transfer, 4 years old, faithful as a church bell, dead with 2 clicks. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus so that no one on this earth could open anything new wearing my name. and I filed the formal dispute on the visa ending in 4417, which set a machine in motion that no family meeting could switch off. Because here's what I knew from Dana. Once a dispute is filed, the issuer sends written notice to the address on the account. Not to me, to the address on the account. 1414 Fairground Road. I didn't send my family a letter. I let the bank do it. Banks don't soften their fonts. Then I went to work and ran a normal shift, and I want you to know my hands were steady. Because this is the thing about finally acting. The shaking is all in the before. 3 days later, the $400 didn't land in my mother's account for the first time in 4 years, and my phone lit up like a monitor. You forgot Dad's medication transfer, sweetheart? I hadn't forgotten. I'd remembered, for the first time, that my father has a pension, a paid-off house, and a wife with a genius for arithmetic. I set the phone face down and let the silence do the talking. It was the same silence I'd practiced after the anniversary dinner, but it had changed jobs. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was policy. Saturday morning at 8, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, on my welcome mat, stood my mother, holding a white envelope like a summons. I opened the door, but not the chain latch conversation my mother wanted. She held up the envelope, the bank's dispute notice, already opened, already read. Her voice had lost the frosting. You reported your own mother. I kept mine level, nurse flat. I reported a card I never opened. The bank decided who that involved. We looked at each other through the morning cold, two women holding two completely different stories about the same piece of paper, and then I said I had to get Caleb to his swim lesson, and I closed the door gently, which in my family is the loudest thing you can do. The counterattack took about 2 days to organize, which honestly, for my mother, was slow. The family group chat lit up in waves. In her version, I was drowning in stress, raising a boy alone, confused about accounts I'd surely agreed to years ago and forgotten. The word paranoid was typed by a cousin and not retracted. Her church circle heard she was being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. 2 aunts went quiet on me. One uncle sent a thumbs up to something I can't unknow. But there was one message, late on the second night, from my cousin Danny, sent private. You okay? For what it's worth, I once watched your mom write down what people gave at Grandma Eileen's funeral, like, in a book. I stared at that text for a long time, so other people had seen the arithmetic. They'd just never stood close enough to be entered in it. I didn't post my side. I didn't correct the record in the group chat. They could have my reputation for a season. They could not have my signature ever again. Then Tuesday, the collector called, and the number they dialed was the nurse's station. There's a phone at the nurse's station that exists for surgeons and parents, and on Tuesday, in the middle of MedPass, it rang for me. A collections agent calling about a delinquent auto loan on the pediatric floor of St. Luke's. It turned out Madison had listed my work number as a reference on the loan paperwork. Of course she had. And 90 days of her silence had finally rolled downhill to a stranger reading a script to a nurse holding a med cup. My charge nurse Tanya handed me the message slip with the careful non-expression we use for families in denial, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. Not guilt, exposure. My family had finally billed me at the one address I'd kept clean. On my break, I called the agency back and did what I do best, which is procedure. Under federal collection law, they may not call my workplace once I tell them my employer prohibits it, and all further contact goes in writing. I said it twice, calmly, and got a confirmation number, because confirmation numbers are love letters you write to your future self. When I hung up, Ruth Delgado was standing in the break room doorway with 2 vending machine coffees. Ruth is 58, retired from our floor, lives across the hall from me, and has a way of appearing exactly when the ceiling is coming down. She handed me a coffee. Sit. Tell it all. So for the first time, I did. The card, the ledger, the jar. All of it. Ruth listened like a triage nurse, nodding at the vitals. Then she said, "Utility daughter. I was one. So, what's your plan?" And right then, Dana called with a deadline I didn't expect. Dana didn't do preambles. The issuer accepted the dispute provisionally, But to clear your liability before your rate lock expires, they need the notarized affidavit and a police report within 10 business days. No affidavit, the balance stays yours, your debt-to-income breaks, and we lose the house. I'm sorry to put it that way. I thanked her for putting it exactly that way. Then I drove to the Millbrook Police Department and sat across a desk from Detective Alan Marsh of the Financial Crimes Unit, a tired, decent man with reading glasses pushed up in his hair, and I asked him to tell me the truth about what a report would actually do. He did. A report isn't handcuffs, he said. In family cases, prosecutors rarely file unless the victim pushes hard. Mostly these end in restitution agreements. But I can't take a report against a family member. The name goes on the form. There it was, the whole machine, laid out on a government desk. To get my name back, I had to write down my mother's. Not shout it, not post it, just write it, in a small box, on a form, and mean it. Before you type, just pay it and keep the peace. And I know some of you are typing it. I want you to picture the newest page of that green ledger, the one with a 7-year-old's initial at the top. Peace that gets billed monthly isn't peace. It's a subscription. If you're with me, hit subscribe yourself. The free kind. Because what my mother did at my father's birthday dinner is something I'm still not over. That night, the affidavit sat on my kitchen table, notary page blank. It sat there through 3 shifts, 3 school runs, 3 suppers. I'd stopped being afraid of my mother. I was afraid of the mirror, of becoming a woman who files paperwork on her own mother and calls it love. Sunday evening, Madison finally texted me directly, which told me the family had run out of intermediaries. Dad's in the ER. Chest pains. Happy now? I left Caleb with Ruth and drove to St. Luke's, and I want to be honest about the drive. Half of me was a terrified daughter, and the other half was a nurse who had already noticed the timing. Both halves parked the car. In the ER, they'd already run his blood work. His troponin was negative, his EKG was clean, and the working diagnosis was anxiety and reflux, a body keeping the books its owner refused to open. He would be fine. I stayed anyway, in the chair by his bed, because love doesn't wait for the test results to decide whether to show up. At 2 a.m, my father woke, found my wrist and held it, and in the hum of the monitors he finally talked. He told me about the night of his own wedding, how my mother, in her going-away dress, had my father drive her past Eileen's house so she could put her envelope in the jar before the honeymoon. He told me that the day Eileen died, my mother stood at the sink and washed that jar, dried it, and set it in the cupboard like an heirloom. She doesn't know another way to love, Sophie. It's the way she was taught. The jar was the whole language. And for one long minute in that dark room, I saw her, 16, in a diner apron, sliding half of everything she'd earned across a counter toward a woman who never once said thank you. I held that girl in my mind, and I ached for her, truly. But pity is not a payment plan. When I stepped into the hallway, my mother was standing at the far end under the exit sign, eyes red, and she opened her mouth and began the last offer she would ever make me. We sat in the empty ER waiting room at almost 3 a.m, under lights that flatter no one, and my mother laid out terms like a woman who had consulted someone because she had. Here is what will happen, she said, even-voiced. You will withdraw that dispute. You will settle the card quietly. It's $9,400, you have it. You will resume your contribution to this family. And Saturday, you will come to your father's birthday dinner at Harlan's and sit in your place, and none of this will ever be spoken of again. She smoothed her coat over her knees. And if you file those papers instead, hear me, Sophie. You will not have a family, and Caleb will not have grandparents. You'll have done that to him, not me. There it was. My son, slid across the table like a chip. I asked her quietly if she'd ever once done the math the other direction, what the family owed me. She looked at me with genuine confusion, as if I'd asked her to divide by 0. And then she said the thing that told me the whole story, hers and mine, and the jars. I paid my mother until the day she died. Every week. I never complained. I never counted. She caught herself, but we both heard it. She counted everything. It's your turn. That is the order of things. My turn. Not a wrong to be righted. A shift to be covered. Like the debt was a family business handed down and I was refusing my inheritance. I stood up and buttoned my coat. Noted, I said. On the drive home, and I know how this sounds, I laughed once, alone, at a red light. Saturday. Same restaurant. Probably the same table. My mother does love a full circle. As it happens, so do I. Wednesday, Ruth sat me down at her kitchen table, read the affidavit front to back through her drugstore glasses, and pushed it back across the placemat. She asked exactly one question. What are you more afraid of losing? Your family, or your job title in it? I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out, and Ruth nodded like a nurse reading a monitor, because the silence was the vital sign. I had been the strong one, the steady one, the one who covers, for so long that I couldn't find the seam where the job ended and I began. Losing them was grief, but losing the title, reliable Sophie, Sophie who handles it, that was the one that whited out my mind, which is how I knew the title was the tumor. Get your coat, Ruth said. She drove me to the notary in the strip mall by the bank and stood beside me smelling of coffee and peppermint while I signed my name. My whole, legal, first and last name, the one they'd been spending. And the stamp came down with a thunk like a firm diagnosis. Signing is medicine, Ruth said in the car. Filing is the dose. The papers went into my purse, unfiled. The deadline was Monday, 9 a.m. Then Ruth did one more thing. She called the charge desk and took my Sunday night shift so I could sleep before filing day, and when I started the automatic no thank you, she looked at me until I stopped. Yes, I said. Thank you. No conditions, no repayment attached. It had taken me 34 years to say it plain, and between me and that Monday deadline stood exactly one birthday dinner. Friday night, I was folding laundry when Caleb appeared in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, holding the stegosaurus he only carries when something is heavy. He climbed onto my bed, arranged the stegosaurus with great ceremony, and then asked the question he'd been carrying since spring. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad because of me? Because you bought me the steak? 7 years old. They had held the account open in his name for 1 year, and he was already trying to make the first payment. That is how it starts. That is exactly how it starts. I put down the laundry and sat on the edge of the bed, and I said each word slowly because I was laying bricks. Nobody pays to sit at my table, not you, not anyone. You did nothing, and you owe nothing, and none of this is yours to carry. He studied me with that lie detector face kids have. Then he nodded, tucked the stegosaurus under his chin, and was asleep in 4 minutes. The way children sleep when someone else agrees to hold the heavy thing. I stood in the doorway a long time, watching him breathe. I had already decided to go to the birthday dinner. Not to perform, and not to fight. To finish it properly, face to face, the way you close a chart before you leave a shift. And so that someday, when Caleb asked how it ended, I could tell him his mother walked out the front door, not the back. I laid out my good blue dress, I put the affidavit in my purse, and I practiced one short sentence in the mirror. Harlan's Chop House, Saturday night. The long table by the fireplace. My mother reserved the exact same table, and I honestly don't know if it was a message or if she simply cannot imagine the world rearranged. But this time, everything was different, and the differences were the tell. A chair was already set for Caleb, with a booster the hostess mentioned had been requested in advance. A kid's menu waited on his plate, crayons fanned beside it like a peace treaty. Madison greeted us at a temperature I hadn't felt from her since high school. We ordered the ribeye for Caleb, she sang. Medium. That's right, isn't it? It was right. That was the eerie part. The machine knew exactly what generosity looked like. It had simply never priced it for us before. My father looked good, color back in his face, tearing his dinner roll into small pieces. Travis's watch caught the firelight every time he reached for his lobster. A new band since the ER, if I wasn't mistaken, on a truck loan 90 days past due. Nobody mentioned the bank. Nobody mentioned the dispute. The conversation stayed on Harper's school and Brody's tooth, and my mother watched me down the length of that table the whole meal, pleasant and unblinking, a treasurer confirming a deposit had cleared. I ate. I complimented the potatoes. In nursing school, they teach you that the calmest person in the room is the one holding the chart, and my purse was on my lap the whole night. Then, as the plates were cleared and before dessert could land, my mother picked up her spoon and tapped it twice against her wineglass, and the table hushed. "Before the cake," she said, smiling at me, "I have a gift for Sophie." The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, tied with a thin gold ribbon, and for one split second the child in me, the one who still hoped, thought, maybe it's an apology, maybe it's a check. Maybe 40 years of arithmetic ends in a card with flowers on it. I untied the ribbon. Inside was a single typed page, and across the top, in bold capitals, it said, "Family Repayment Plan." I'm going to tell you exactly what it said, because I've read it many times since. Item 1. Sophie withdraws the bank dispute within 48 hours. Item 2. Sophie assumes the Visa balance as a family matter, handled privately. Item 3. Sophie resumes monthly support, adjusted from $400 to $500 for cost of living. Item 4. And this is the one I want you to sit with. In exchange, Caleb receives full family access. Holidays, birthdays, grandparents. My son's grandparents, offered back to me at a rate increase, in exchange for my signature. There was a line at the bottom for that signature, with the date already filled in. My mother's handwriting on the date. Of course, the machine does not apologize, it issues terms. My mother folded her hands and addressed me in her blessing voice, the one she uses for grace before meals. "Sign it, sweetheart. Tonight for your father's birthday, and this family will be whole again. Family means nobody counts what it costs." I want you to hold that sentence next to the green ledger with the 5% interest column, because I did. The greatest lie my mother ever told, and she told it as a toast. Madison produced a pen from her bag. Travis's pen, the gold-capped one. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son, halfway through a ribeye he did not have to earn, and I stood up. The last time I stood up at that table, I made an announcement. This time I didn't raise my voice at all, and that's why every head at the table leaned in. I've learned that from years of night shifts, that the quietest voice in the room sets the volume. I looked only at my mother. "Before I answer, I want to tell you something I know," I said. "I know about the jar on Grandma Eileen's windowsill. I know half of every paycheck went into it from the time you were 16, every Friday, called rent. I know your brother got a car and you got the dishes. And I know you carried an envelope to that jar on the night of your own wedding." My mother went absolutely still. Down the table, my father set down his fork without a sound. "You paid your mother until the day she died," I said. "And I think I'm the only person at this table who understands what that cost you. So I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to read anything out loud. I'm not going to perform for the family the way this plan wanted me to sign for it." I touched the cream-colored page. "But the jar stops here, Mom. I'm not taking the handoff." Then I told her, plainly, in the voice I use for treatment plans, what Monday would hold. At 9 in the morning, the affidavit and the police report would be filed. I had told the detective I would not be pushing for charges. I said that clearly, and I watched Madison's shoulders drop half an inch. "I don't need you in handcuffs, Mom. I need my name back. The balance goes back to whoever made it. That isn't revenge. It's arithmetic. Your kind." My mother's voice cracked upward, for the first time in my life in a public room. "You ungrateful..." And then it simply stopped, because I hadn't moved, hadn't flushed, hadn't given her surface to strike. I laid the family repayment plan down next to the breadbasket, unsigned, which felt like the correct filing location. I counted out cash for 2 meals, mine and Caleb's, and set it under the salt shaker with a good tip, the arithmetic of a woman who pays for exactly what her family ordered. "Noted," I said, one last time, to no one and to all of them, and then the sentence I had practiced in the mirror, the one that had been coming for 22 years. The ledgers closed. I helped Caleb into his jacket. He hugged his grandfather, said happy birthday in his church voice, and my father held on one beat too long, whispering something into my son's hair I couldn't hear. We walked out past the fireplace and the white tablecloths, and a room that had gone politely deaf, the way rooms do. Nobody clapped. Real life doesn't clap. But the waiter, our waiter, the breadbasket waiter, still working that same floor, met my eyes at the door and gave me the smallest nod ever recorded. Monday, 9 a.m. I kept my appointment, and my hand did not shake. It was the only signature my family ever got from me that I read first. I was buckling Caleb into the back seat when I heard footsteps on the asphalt behind me. My father, moving faster than a man 6 days past a chest pain scare should move. Reflex took over. I met him and took his elbow, 2 fingers finding his pulse before either of us said a word. He waved me off, breathing hard, and stood there in the parking lot lights with his hands in his pockets. And for a moment he looked exactly like the man in the garage, hiding from weather. "I can't stand up to her," he said finally. "I want you to know I know that about myself. I ran out of that a long time ago." He looked at the restaurant window. "But I see all of it, Sophie. I always have. And what you did in there." He stopped, jaw working. He never finished the sentence, and I never needed him to. It was the closest thing to a defense he had ever offered me, delivered 40 years late, in a parking lot, out of her earshot. And I decided to keep it anyway. Some people can only love you in the parking lot. Through the window, I watched my mother straighten her napkin, spine perfect, and turn to Madison. She said something brief. Madison went very still, the way I imagine I used to. Travis looked down at his watch. The seat I had just emptied was already being refilled, because the machine does not grieve, it restaffs. I drove us home past the dark shop windows of Millbrook, and my eyes stayed dry the whole way. I had done my grieving in pieces for years. That dinner was just the receipt. The week after I filed brought 2 phone calls. One I expected, and one I truly didn't. The first call came Wednesday, from Dana, and she was almost cheerful, which for Dana is a standing ovation. The issuer's letter was in my file. The disputed balance was suspended from my liability pending investigation. Underwriting had accepted the documentation with my written explanation of the cosign history, and the rate lock would hold. "Congratulations, Sophie," she said. "The blue house is yours to close on." I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear and let myself feel it. All of it, for exactly 1 minute. Detective Marsh called that same week to confirm the report was in the system and told me what I'd already made peace with. Cases like this, inside families, almost always resolve in a restitution agreement, quietly, through lawyers. "No handcuffs," he said. "Paperwork." "Good," I told him. Some victories are paperwork. Those are the ones that hold. The second call was the one I didn't expect. Madison. No preamble, no tears, and for the first time in years, no performance. Her voice low and flat, like someone reading a lab result. "Mom says that since you've abandoned this family, I should start paying my share now." She used those words. My share. A pause. "Sophie, did you really see a book?" And I realized my sister was standing at the top of the same chute I'd just climbed out of, hearing the first click of the machine turning toward her. "You'll see it eventually," I said. "Your pages start with the word gift. They don't end with it." I wasn't cruel about it, and I didn't rescue her either. She wouldn't have believed me anyway. Not yet. I just told the truth and hung up. 3 weeks later, a woman from the title office handed me 2 keys on a paper ring. Moving day was small and loud and perfect. Ruth carried boxes of books like a woman half her age and bossed everyone within range. Tanya came straight off a night shift with 2 nurses from our floor, and they wrestled my secondhand sofa through the blue front door sideways, laughing, while I stood on my own porch and let them. That sentence took me 34 years to learn to write. I let them. Caleb's dinosaur bed went against the left wall of his room, under the east window, exactly where I'd measured with my eyes months before. and the morning light landed on it like it had read the plan. My family's silence held all summer, formal as a treaty. The restitution agreement was worked out through a lawyer, quietly, the balance settling back where it had always belonged. I signed nothing except my own mortgage, which I read twice, every page, out of new habit. But I'll tell you about the $20, because it's the part I didn't see coming. My father came by on moving day. He stayed 20 minutes, never past the front hallway, hands in his pockets, looking at the house the way he looks at engines, approving of the bones. On his way out, he stopped in front of Caleb and pressed something into his hand, folded into quarters, the way men of his generation pass money, a $20 bill. And then my father, who had watched a green ledger swallow both his daughter's childhoods and said nothing for decades, leaned down to my son's ear and gave him the only inheritance that mattered. "Don't tell Grandma," he said, "and don't write it down." Caleb, who understood none of it and somehow all of it, solemnly shook his grandfather's hand. That page of the ledger ends there, unbalanced, unbilled, free. These days, Saturday mornings belong to a diner 4 blocks from the Blue House, a place with vinyl booths and a waitress named Dot, who calls everyone baby. Caleb orders first. That's not an accident. That's the house rule. He gets the triple stack of pancakes with extra whipped cream, and nobody at the table asks whether he's earned it, and nobody slides him a bread basket, and nobody writes anything down. I didn't pack him anything. He ordered first. Last Saturday, in the middle of the pancakes, my phone buzzed. "Madison. Hey, things are tight. Could I borrow?" I didn't read the rest. And I want you to notice what I didn't feel. No anger, no satisfaction, no old tug behind the ribs. Just a familiar diagnosis walking through a familiar door. I typed one line back. "No, but if you ever want out, I know the way." Then I turned the phone face down next to the syrup, which is where phones belong on Saturdays. Maybe she'll take me up on it someday. The machine is still running over on Fairground Road. Machines like that don't stop. They just restaff. But its oldest account is closed, and its newest one ends with a boy who will never know his shoes had a price tag in a green book. The check came to $23.40. I tipped like a woman who used to wait for permission. And then my son and I walked home, 4 blocks uphill, to a house that has never once billed us for the light. Here is the one thing I know now that I didn't know at that anniversary dinner. Love that keeps a ledger was never love. It was a loan, and the bravest thing you can do is close the book, pay for your own pancakes, and teach your child that a seat at the table is a birthright, not a bill. That's my story. 1 bread basket, 1 green ledger, 1 signature that gave me back my name. If this reminded you to pull your credit report or to stop paying rent on a seat at somebody's table, take it as your sign. Do it this week. Share this with the one person you know who always covers the check. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.